It is true that girls are encouraged. Boys are treated like they're defective girls. Girls are the example. You're supposed to behave and sit up straight and do all this. And boys are being plugged into this learning environment, which is frankly like alien to them in the way that boys tend to learn versus girls. And so a lot of them just check out
on some of these. Like, because like I said, like my middle school was the most progressive private middle school like you could ever go to, and like I was never shamed for being a boy. They to be fair, I did a little rowdy stuff and I got in trouble for that, but it was never like, oh, you need to sit down and shut up like a girl. Like I'm a little confused.
Right, but the fact is that males tend to have a more tactile learning basis,
like hands-on sort of stuff. Yeah,
physical activity, things like that. A requirement for more physical activity, but the entire school system is, we give you 7 hours of sit down and shut up, and we give you half an hour of go run and play.
Recess, yeah.
Where boys probably need substantially more tactile learning. And so what John's saying is, it's not that they're going to the boys and saying, you're a boy, you're bad. They're saying, behave in the way we've outlined.
Right, which
and
is
as
against
it pertains,
their nature is kind of the argument. Like
it's just more feminine. It's more female-centric.
It creates conditions which are going to make them less successful, and it tries to elevate women into being more successful, let alone to mention, the things, all these programs, outreach, women in STEM, everything like that.
Can we pause? Because, okay, when you say they're going to be less successful, I mean, this has kind of been how we've done schooling for decades, right? Like, this wasn't really borne out in the past 100 years that men were less successful because they were feminized.
That's
in
not.
school, or?
No one. It's not. I guess you can say feminized, but
that was what you guys were saying. They're saying
take a look at the last 100 years.
The last 100.
Quite literally, I think the argument would support that over the last 100 years of industrialized, institutionalized learning facilities, it has been to the detriment of men, and we can see that substantially.
Like what metric? I mean,
men are more likely to commit suicide. They don't live as long.
I think
they're more likely to be unemployed. They're more likely to be unemployed right now, especially in this generation, millennials and Gen Z. They're more likely to live at home with their parents, not have jobs, not go to university.
This to 10 years ago or 20 years ago, maybe, yeah, sure. But if we're looking at past 100 years, and you talked about industrialization, where it's like, yeah, I think just on a whole, everyone is better off post 1860s, invention of factories,
the point is this:
cities,
since we've implemented this institutionalized learning industrialization, you've had a downward trend, and
that's what I'm asking.
That doesn't mean
what
it's the
industrialized
sole
learning are you talking about?
Industrialized learning is when. Pre-industrial revolution, you had small schoolrooms, sort of, where it was
the schoolhouse with the one teacher and the 20 kids, or whatever.
And even then, it wasn't entirely that way. A lot of kids would just learn from their parents, or through correspondence, or through self-study, or through their, largely.
Yeah, but I mean, if we're comparing industrialized, we wouldn't say we're smarter, better off than that as a whole. I mean, I feel like most people are doing better, absolutely, than the 1850s learning.
But we're not talking about technological advancement. We're talking about the structure of society.
Yeah, I'm talking about life expectancy, happiness,
technological advancement. Indeed, has continued to go up, largely due to oil.
Down actually,
in the 1850s.
No, maybe not from the 1850s, but quite recently, life expectancy has dipped, I think, in the last 5 or 10 years or so, particularly for white men who have been so vilified unfairly. And what was the other one? Happiness. I don't know how you would quantify that.
That is a hard one for sure.
The general social survey, or, as Tim mentioned, suicide rates. That's a pretty good.
No. Just I think it's quite simple. I mean, happiness is relative. It's subjective, and humans adapt. But the fact that we have a large portion of the younger generation of men, their NEETs, not in employment, education, and training, is indicative of a failure of our society towards men.
Yeah.
Women are more likely to go to university and graduate than men by It's 60-40 now?
But their suicide rates are up as well, right? I would say men are better at everything, so that's why we kill ourselves more, because we're better at it. And they're more likely to do, people always bring up gun deaths, right? I think half of them, there's 13,000 of them per year. Liberals will complain about this and gun. Yeah, most of them are suicides. And if you have a gun, it's easier. And women tend to do things like wrist
pills.
Stuff, pills, things that you can recover from. And I think it's one of those things where people are unhappier in the trends right now because of what you're talking about, because you look at your boomer dad and your Gen X dad, and it's well, what the fuck? You got all these opportunities and I don't get any of these, and there's all these expectations. It's what's the big lie of just go to college, you'll be successful. And I graduated college. I was one of the lucky ones. A lot of people just didn't get jobs out of college. They're struggling. I can't afford a house. The only people I know in my generation, I'm 29, that have a house are the 2 engineers that got married. And even then, they're not in California. They're in Colorado. They're in some other place where the cost of living is much easier. So I think this idea that this is because of the demonization of men is not nearly so borne out as it is people had this expectation of what life was supposed to be, and it's just not happening. And so all these as a whole society in our generation is more unhappy because we're not getting what we want. We don't have the house. We don't have the white picket fence.
So once again, the issue is if you're an 18-year-old white man and you grew up in a society, you've experienced no privilege.
Why do you say that? No privilege. Like when I say
because
you don't have the Gen X privilege, right? You don't have that economy. But when it's like, hey, like, because again, I hate the word privilege here because it's like you don't feel the idea of black people are your cops are less likely to attack you
because that's
you're black,
not
right.
Because what I would say is the challenge with what you're describing is it's based on class for the most part.
It's
with sometimes a racial component.
I was reading a study actually from, I want to say this is it's on a book called How Fascism Works, which is like the most liberal book I could have brought up here. But it was talking about the hiring practices of people who report themselves as former convicts. And it was like black versus white, not a former convict, black versus white, former convict. And for like the black who are not a former convict, the percentage of whether or not you get hired is already like 10 times lower or something ridiculously low. And then for the black convict level, even the white former convicts were getting like hired at like a 10 to 5% higher rate. It does seem like there is at least this product
sure.
of, and people call that privilege. I don't like that because if I'm a white guy not getting hired, I don't feel privileged, right? That's why I don't like the word.
So the issue is there's no such thing as white privilege. That is a fact statement, not an opinion.
What do you mean by that? Because what I just described
because there's
what people mean. Because I think that's a bad word.
Because you can when you're trying to determine any kind of like fact basis in science, we look for controls. Mm-hmm. And when you look at any other non-white nation, these concepts don't exist. However,
we're a unique nation.
Similar,
the history
meaningless.
Of racism.
Similar.
No, I'm saying it's meaningless.
So if I finish the point that I'm trying to make, instead of you interrupting before the point can be completed,
okay.
The Han Chinese, for instance, have an ethnic majority and supremacy, and they experience what one would define as a privilege.
Okay.
But it's not because it's white privilege.
Yeah, it's Han privilege, sure.
It's just majority privilege. A nation's ethnic and cultural majority tends to dictate what they want and what they expect.
Okay.
That will never go away nor change.
Well, I think it can change. I think if expectations change. But you just described it. The point is...
So the point that I was making...
You're agreeing with the concept, which
there's no white privilege. And if you're a Gen Z white man, you've never experienced such a thing. So when they say, white guys would go and apply for a job, they'd get it. And now a 17-year-old white guy applies and they go, no white people, get out. And he goes, there's no privilege because there isn't.
No white people? I'm sure this has happened before, but like, is there like a massive influx of people like we don't hire white people? I mean, first of all, it's literally illegal, right?
It should be, but this is typically what the left supports. So we interviewed a pro skateboarder
supporting the idea of we can't hire white men. Like,
absolutely,
they're supporting the idea of like I worked at
Floyd era went in the to people of color to women in the S&P 100 or something.
Boosting a marginalized group is not the same as saying no white men. If there are people that say you cannot hire white men,
it is a matter of
because
policy.
You're assuming it's a zero-sum game.
To hire white men.
Yeah, no. Wait, what? It's illegal to hire a white man?
If he started a company and all he were hiring were white men, T-minus what until a lawsuit comes in? They would be investigated. You cannot start an S&P 100 company or some serious company without hiring at least some women, some minorities. So it's illegal to hire based on merit, which yes, in practice makes
that's
it
not illegal to be hired
men.
based on merit, first of all, because the idea that because you're describing it like they just found a black woman on the street and they're like, get in here, right? Versus like, hey, when you look at a pool of qualified candidates, you can't select one race, which is a very different thing. And it's not a zero-sum game. You have a bunch of different slots. If it was one slot and you're like, for this one job, you can't hire a white guy. I think like the only thing that would ever make sense for that is if you're like casting for a show and it's this character's black, right?
But it is a fact that this happens. That white guys are passed over.
Right, but you're describing it as a phenomenon that is so widespread that every 18-year-old zillennial is experiencing this, which is, at least in my experience, is like growing up in this progressive area, in the most progressive place on the planet. This is not happening. I'm not getting discriminated against for being white. Like I said, I'll get some insults here or there, but it's not
That's called being discriminated against for being white, yes.
Okay, sure, but not on an institutional level for jobs. Like no one's like, we're not hiring.
What are you comparing it to?
I'm comparing it to like every other white person that I graduated with, like all the white people around me. Like none of these people are
generations don't experience the same thing as the other generation. Like literally, Gen Z men are struggling.
I am in Gen Z technically, and I hang out with a lot of younger people because I had a deferred college like graduation. So.
Would you agree that Gen Z men are struggling?
Yes, absolutely, but I don't think it's because of white men discrimination.
I didn't say it was. It's a component.
Yeah.
The point is when the left comes out and says we want affirmative action in hiring and colleges and public contracting, the 17 or 18-year-old white man is going, whatever it is you think boomers got, I don't have. I don't get. So when you create a racially discriminatory system, you have created a privilege for certain classes of people.
Yeah, in that specific thing. Yeah, absolutely. And this is what I was talking about. Like, you don't, even if, like, just for a second, assume that the phenomenon that we both agree exists is called white privilege, just because that's what people call it. it exists insofar as like, yeah, this person might be preferenced in this specific area, or you might not just face the same problem as a black person here, but you don't experience white privilege. You don't. I don't feel the absence of something. Well, you agree the majority group in control is going to have some sort of like in-group preference for that same
which
group,
for the past 15, 20 years has been liberal left. So they're white critical.
To an extent. I mean, our country is not like a liberal left majority ruled by. They're not like the majority.
When Jack Dorsey was in charge of X, for instance, if you post FBI crime stats, you'd get banned.
I'm sorry, your example of whether or not white men or liberals are in control is just Twitter not allowing like.
Perhaps I could describe it as Facebook, YouTube, and X, the 3 largest social media platforms in the country and the world. Social media
is a big component of our
banning
lives,
people for posting fact data because it was deemed racist.
Yeah, but that's not just posting the fact data. Almost if you're posting like 1350 stuff, it's because you're trying to paint a greater narrative of, black people have a crime gene or something.
So, so you're not disagreeing with me?
I'm saying that if you're using the example of like, oh, look at our institutions and how they're overwhelmingly liberal. If you're talking about social media, yeah, they were for a while. I think that has since shifted, obviously, especially
and major
Twitter.
cities, institutions are liberal as well.
Major cities, yeah. But if you're talking about like the country as a whole, jobs, like all these places, this is not like everything everywhere. Like it is absolutely part of it, 100%. And like half the country, sure, is like liberal, progressive, not progressive, liberal at the very least. But the idea that like that is the same as saying like a white majority in group is just not like borne out. There's not like, I guess you might say like certain people might discriminate against your politics in certain areas. Definitely in San Francisco, I've had people who are MAGA leaning at the least. But like that is not the same as like a white in-group preference. This is like
there's not a debate on this issue. This is a fact statement that we had Supreme Court hearings over as to liberal institutions not admitting hiring white people.
But that's not what I'm saying.
Now,
you're saying does this happen? I'm saying yeah, obviously. I'm saying this is not the widespread concept of America. Is this in-group privilege for white liberal progressives or liberal progressives? Like, I just don't think that's the case.
No, it's anti-white. Sure,
liberal progressives being the majority in-group, in the same way you might say that America was a primary white in-group preference in like the 60s. Like there's not like that sort of thing going on, like to the extent of like, oh, we're like
the point being the left right now is penalizing young men for something they did not do. It's the sins of the father.
Penalizing how? Like you talk about discrimination, which is true.
If you apply to go to Harvard, you have to score higher substantially than a Latino or black person to get in.
Yeah.
That's called a penalization.
That sort of, but again, this is like
they literally deduct against your score based on your race.
Right, and they do that for like Asians the worst, right, too? It's
so
I know. There was like a whole lot about this. Did they get rid of that?
I think they technically didn't. They changed the way they went about it, which was another controversy. I don't know where the lawsuit ended up. It's been a while since we covered that one.
But this is also one of the things where I'm like, I haven't gotten to finish this point, but the idea like you don't experience privilege is like you don't feel less detriment. You don't feel that.
I've only ever felt more from it.
Huh?
I've only ever felt more detriment.
Exactly. You only ever feel it when it's against you. So like if someone is like, oh, like let's just say we're talking about the 1960s, where like obviously you would assume like white privilege exists in the 60s, right?
No.
We can agree. No. Okay. Well,
I don't want to get into that.
I kind of know your politics. I don't want to get into it.
You couldn't marry someone who wasn't the same race as you. You couldn't live with them.
Yeah.
Again, I don't like the concession of like, oh, my grandparents were the crazy ones, but I know better. It's like this has been a consistent trend and in the country's history.
Well, hold on, wait. I'm literally just saying, was it not obvious that you had a harder life if you were black in the 60s? You can't say no to that. Come on.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Culture War podcast. We're live every Friday, 10 a.m. to noon, so subscribe and come hang out.